Hello, everyone, and welcome back. Come closer, settle in. If you're here with me tonight, I'd be grateful if you'd leave a like, subscribe, and share this story with someone who needs to hear it. I'd also love to know where you're watching from and what time it is there. My name is Margaret, and I've been a truck driver across this country for 17 years. 17 long years of highways, truck stops, loading docks, and endless miles of asphalt stretching out in front of my headlights. Most people think trucking is a man's job, and maybe they're right. But every day I climbed into that cab and hauled freight from coast to coast, I proved them wrong. Tonight, I'm going to tell you about 3 nights from my years on the road. 3 nights that changed me forever. 3 nights when I learned that the most frightening things you can encounter out there aren't mechanical failures, bad weather, or other drivers. No, the most terrifying things are the ones you can't explain. The things that defy logic and reason. The things that make you question everything you think you know about the world. These stories are true. Every word happened exactly as I'm going to tell you. And if you're a truck driver yourself, or if you know someone who is, I hope you listen carefully, because the road is far darker and stranger than most people will ever understand. If you're ready, let's begin with the first story. The one that taught me some rest. Stops should never be used after dark. The first incident I need to tell you about happened in the fall of 1978. I was 45 years old at the time and had been driving professionally for about 3 years. I was still new to long-haul trucking, still learning the routes and the rhythm of life on the road. My husband had passed away 2 years earlier, and I had started driving trucks to support myself and my 2 young daughters. It wasn't an easy job, but it paid better than waitressing or factory work, and I loved the freedom. I was hauling a load of canned goods from a warehouse in Omaha, Nebraska, to a distribution center in Oklahoma City. It was a straight drive that would take about 7 hours if traffic cooperated. I left Omaha around 3 in the afternoon, planning to reach Oklahoma City before midnight. The first few hours passed without incident. As I headed south through Missouri on Interstate 29, I listened to country music on the radio and watched the afternoon sun turn the cornfields gold. I was in a good mood, and everything felt fine. Or at least, that's what I thought. By the time I crossed into Kansas and merged onto Interstate 69, heading south, the sun had set and the landscape was beginning to darken. That's when I started to get the feeling that trouble was coming. Around 8 o'clock, my truck began making a strange rattling sound from somewhere in the engine compartment. It wasn't loud enough to be an emergency, but it was constant enough to worry me. I pulled into a truck stop near Fort Scott, Kansas, and asked one of the mechanics to take a quick look. After poking around under the hood for about 20 minutes, he told me it was probably a loose heat shield. Nothing dangerous, just annoying. He tightened what he could, but warned me that if the noise got any worse, I should pull over immediately. I thanked him, grabbed a thermos of coffee, and got back on the road. The delay meant I was running about an hour behind schedule. Worse than that, the weather was turning. A cold front was moving through the area, bringing the threat of strong winds and rain with it. By the time I crossed from Interstate 69 into Oklahoma, it was past 10 o'clock, and the sky was pitch black. The rain started about 15 miles south of the Kansas border. Not a gentle rain, but a torrential downpour that reduced visibility to almost nothing. My windshield wipers were working overtime, but I could barely see the road ahead of me. I slowed down to about 35 miles per hour, my hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. That's when I saw the sign for a rest area. Public rest stop, 2 miles ahead. I desperately needed a break. I'd been driving for 7 hours straight, and the stress of driving in this weather was exhausting me. I decided to pull off and wait for the worst of the storm to pass. Maybe grab a quick nap in my sleeper cab. The rest area appeared out of the rain like a ghost. It was smaller than I expected, just a gravel parking lot with a single building that housed restrooms and some vending machines. There were no lights on in the building, which struck me as odd, but I figured maybe they turned them off after a certain hour to save electricity. What really made me uneasy, though, was the other truck. It was parked at the far end of the lot, a big rig similar to mine, but older, maybe from the early 1970s. It was just sitting there in the darkness, no running lights, no movement visible in the cab. In this weather, at this hour, on a relatively remote stretch of highway, it was strange to see another truck just sitting there with no signs of life. I parked my rig about 50 yards away from the other truck, positioning myself so I could keep an eye on it through my driver's side mirror. I turned off my engine, but left my running lights on. The rain hammered against my cab roof like 1,000 tiny fists. For a few minutes, I just sat there, watching the other truck and waiting to see if anyone would emerge from it. Nothing, no movement, no lights, nothing. It looked abandoned. I needed to use the restroom, so I grabbed my flashlight and rain jacket and climbed down from my cab. The rain soaked me instantly, despite the jacket. I ran toward the building, my boots splashing through puddles, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The restroom building was unlocked, but when I pushed the door open, I immediately knew something was wrong. The place smelled terrible, like mildew and rot, and something else I couldn't identify. Something organic and unpleasant. My flashlight beam revealed walls covered in graffiti and floors littered with trash and debris. Would you have used that restroom or gone back to your truck? Tell me in the comments. I decided I could wait. I turned to leave, and that's when I saw him. A man was standing between me and my truck. He'd appeared out of nowhere, silent as a ghost. He was wearing what looked like a trucker's jacket and cap. But in the darkness and rain, I couldn't make out his features. He was just a dark silhouette, standing in the rain, perfectly still, watching me. My heart jumped into my throat. "Hello?" I called out over the sound of the rain. "Can I help you?" He didn't respond, didn't move, just stood there like a statue. I started walking toward my truck, trying to appear calm, even though my legs were shaking. The man didn't move to block my path, but as I got closer, I could see him more clearly in the glow of my truck's running lights. What I saw made my blood turn to ice. His face was wrong. The features were there, eyes, nose, mouth, but they looked painted on, like a mannequin or a wax figure. His skin had an unnatural pallor, almost gray, and his eyes didn't blink. They just stared at me with an intensity that felt predatory. "You shouldn't be here," he said. His voice was flat and emotionless, like he was reading from a script. "This place closes at sunset. Everyone knows that." "I didn't see any signs," I said, still walking toward my truck. "I'll leave right now." "Too late," he said. "You're here now. You have to follow the rules." I was almost at my truck, just 20 more feet. "What rules?" I asked, not really wanting to know the answer. "The rules of the rest area," he said. "Once you park here after dark, you have to stay until morning. That's the rule. If you try to leave before sunrise, you'll never find your way back to the highway." I reached my truck and climbed up into the cab as quickly as I could, locking the doors behind me. Through my rain-streaked windshield, I could see the man still standing in the same spot, staring at my truck with those unblinking eyes. I started my engine, my hands trembling. I didn't care about his stupid rules. I needed to get out of this place. But when I put the truck in gear and tried to drive toward the exit, something impossible happened. The exit wasn't there anymore. Where there should have been a driveway leading back to the highway, there was only darkness and trees. I turned my truck around, trying to find another way out. But every direction I looked showed the same thing. Dense forest surrounding the parking lot on all sides. This wasn't possible. I'd driven into this rest area just minutes ago. There had been a clear entrance from the highway. But now, it was as if the rest area had been transported to the middle of a forest, miles from any road. The man was walking toward my truck now, taking slow, deliberate steps through the rain. He stopped right outside my driver's side window and stared at me with that expressionless face. "I told you," he said, his voice somehow audible over the sound of the engine and the rain. "You can't leave until morning. Those are the rules." I backed my truck away from him, turning around again, desperately searching for any opening in the trees. But there was nothing. I was trapped in this impossible place with this impossible man and that dark, silent truck at the other end of the lot. For the next 6 hours, I sat in my locked cab, engine running, watching the man. He never moved from his spot outside my window, never blinked, never showed any sign of being affected by the cold or the rain. He just stood there, staring at me with those painted-on features, waiting. Around 4 in the morning, I noticed something that made my situation even more terrifying. The other truck at the end of the lot, the old dark rig I'd noticed when I first arrived, its license plate was visible now in my headlights. The plate was from 1961, 17 years old. That truck had been sitting in this rest area for 17 years. I looked back at the man outside my window, and for the first time, I saw him smile. It was a horrible smile, too wide, showing too many teeth. "Some drivers don't follow the rules," he said. "Some try to leave before sunrise. Their trucks stay here forever, empty, waiting." I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I just sat there, watching him, watching the trees, praying for sunrise. When the first light of dawn finally began to break through the clouds, something remarkable happened. The trees began to fade, slowly at first, then faster, like they were dissolving into mist. Within minutes, they were gone completely, and I could see the highway again, just beyond the parking lot exit. The man was fading too. His solid form was becoming translucent, see-through. He raised one hand in what might have been a wave, or a warning, or a farewell. Then he was gone, vanished like smoke. I didn't waste a second. I threw my truck into gear and drove out of that rest area as fast as I dared. When I reached the highway, I looked back in my mirrors. The rest area was still there, but the building looked different in the morning light. It looked old, abandoned, like it hadn't been used in decades. And the other truck, the one with the 1961 license plate, it was still there, sitting in the exact same spot, silent and empty. I drove straight through to Oklahoma City without stopping, delivered my load, and immediately called my dispatcher. I told him I was never taking that route again. When he asked why, I told him there was construction I wanted to avoid. I couldn't tell him the truth. He'd think I'd lost my mind. But I know what I experienced that night. I know there are places along our highways that exist outside normal rules and normal time. Places where drivers can become trapped forever if they don't follow the rules. Rules that no one posts on signs. Rules that you only learn when it's already too late. Since that night, 47 years ago, I've been very careful about which rest areas I use. If a place looks abandoned or poorly maintained, I keep driving. If there are old vehicles parked there with no signs of life, I keep driving. And I never, ever stop at a rest area after dark unless I absolutely have no other choice. Because I know that somewhere out there, on highways across this country, there are rest areas that aren't really rest areas at all. They're traps, and the things that run them are patient. They'll wait forever for the next driver who doesn't know the rules. That old truck with the 1961 plates is probably still sitting in that parking lot right now, waiting, empty, a warning that no one can see until it's too late. The second incident I need to tell you about happened 11 years later, in the winter of 1989. I was 56 years old at the time and had been driving professionally for 14 years. I had seen just about everything the road could throw at you. Snowstorms, ice storms, flash floods, you name it. You might think this sounds arrogant, but I believed I was experienced enough to handle any situation. Life proved me wrong once again. I was hauling a load of automotive parts from Detroit, Michigan, to Nashville, Tennessee. It was a route I had probably driven 50 times before, heading south on Interstate 75 through Ohio and Kentucky. The weather forecast called for some fog early in the morning, but nothing severe. Typical Midwestern winter conditions. I left Detroit around midnight, planning to arrive in Nashville by midday the next day. The first few hours passed without incident. Traffic was light, the roads were clear, and the sky was filled with stars. I made good time through Michigan and crossed into Ohio around 2 in the morning. Everything was going according to plan. That's when the fog rolled in. At first, it was just thin patches drifting across the highway, nothing to worry about. But within 20 minutes, it had thickened so much that I could barely see the taillights of the cars ahead of me. I slowed down to 40 miles per hour, then 30, then 25. The fog was unlike anything I had ever seen before, dense, gray, and somehow glowing, as if it were lit from within. I was somewhere south of Toledo when I lost sight of the highway markers completely. The fog was so thick that my headlights just bounced back at me, creating a white wall that made it impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. I was driving blind, following the feel of the road beneath my tires and hoping I was still in my lane. That's when I saw the tail lights. They appeared suddenly out of the fog. 2 red lights about 100 yards ahead of me. Another truck. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. If I could follow this truck, at least I wouldn't be alone in this nightmare. I matched my speed to his and settled in behind him, keeping a safe distance. After about 10 minutes of following these taillights, I noticed something strange. There were more lights appearing in the fog. Not just 1 truck ahead of me, but 3, then 5, then 7, all traveling at the same speed, all perfectly spaced apart, all heading south on what I assumed was Interstate 75. I'd stumbled into a convoy. Convoys aren't unusual for truckers. Sometimes several of us will travel together for safety or companionship, especially in bad weather. But there was something odd about this particular convoy. The trucks were all old models, the 1960s and 1970s styles that you rarely saw on the highways anymore. And they were all the same dark color. Impossible to tell if it was black or dark blue or dark green in the fog. I grabbed my CB radio and tried to make contact. "This is Nashville-bound hauler in the Freightliner," I said. "Convoy ahead of me. Do you copy?" Static. Nothing but static. I tried again on different channels. Channel 19, Channel 17, Channel 9. All static. The fog was so thick, it must have been interfering with the radio signals. If you were in this fog, following trucks you couldn't contact, would you keep following, or would you pull over? Let me know. I decided to keep following them. What choice did I have? The fog showed no signs of lifting, and at least with these trucks ahead of me, I knew I was staying on the road. We drove like that for what felt like hours. A silent convoy of trucks moving through an ocean of fog. No communication. No highway signs visible. Just those red taillights leading the way. Then I noticed something that made my skin crawl. The road beneath my tires felt different. The pavement was rougher, older, and I could have sworn we were traveling on a 2-lane road now. Not the wide interstate I'd been on before. But how was that possible? I hadn't taken any exits. I'd been following the convoy the whole time. I tried my CB radio again. "Convoy ahead. What route are we on? Can anyone hear me?" This time, there was a response, but it wasn't what I expected. A voice came through the static, scratchy and distant, like it was being transmitted from very far away. "Welcome to the night convoy," the voice said. "You're one of us now." "What do you mean?" I asked. "What convoy is this?" "The convoy that never stops," the voice said. "We've been driving these roads for a long time. Some of us for years, some of us for decades. Once you join the night convoy, you drive until the fog lifts. And the fog doesn't lift for everyone." My heart started pounding. I want to leave the convoy. I need to get to Nashville. A different voice came over the radio, this one sounding older and more tired. "Nashville. I remember Nashville. I was heading there in 1967. That was 42 years ago. I never made it. None of us made it to our destinations." I slammed on my brakes, but the truck behind me was too close. I heard the blast of an air horn and saw headlights looming in my mirrors. I accelerated again, forced to keep pace with the convoy. "You can't stop," the first voice said. "If you stop, you'll be lost in the fog forever. At least while you're moving with us, you're on a road. Stop and you'll drift into nowhere." "This isn't real," I said into the CB. "This is impossible." "Tell that to Charlie," a third voice said. "He tried to break away from the convoy back in '72. We found his truck 3 days later, still running, still in gear, sitting in the middle of a field with no roads anywhere near it. Charlie was gone, just vanished. The truck kept running until it ran out of fuel. I looked at my fuel gauge, 3/4 full. I'd filled up in Detroit before leaving, but I'd been driving for what should have been about 4 hours now. My fuel gauge should have been lower. Then I noticed my clock. It showed 2:47 a.m., the same time it had shown when I first entered the fog. My clock had stopped, or time had stopped, or something worse. Maybe time was moving differently in this place, whatever this place was. "Where are we?" I asked into the CB. "What highway is this?" "It's every highway and no highway," the tired voice answered. "It's the road between roads. The fog brings us here sometimes, takes us off the real highways and puts us on the ghost roads, the roads that used to exist but don't anymore, or roads that never existed at all but should have." I could see the convoy more clearly now. There were at least 15 trucks ahead of me, all old models, all dark-colored, all moving in perfect formation. And behind me, I could sense more trucks, though I couldn't see them through the fog. "How long have you all been here?" I asked. "I lost count after the first year," one voice said. "I've been here since 1973, another said. 1961, a third voice whispered. I felt panic rising in my chest. I couldn't be trapped here. I had daughters waiting for me. I had a life. This couldn't be happening. "There has to be a way out," I said. "Someone must have escaped." There was a long silence. Then the first voice spoke again. "Some people say that if you can find the split in the road, the place where the ghost road meets the real highway, you can break free, but you have to do it at exactly the right moment. Too early, and you'll just be driving into the fog with no road at all. Too late, and you'll be stuck with us forever." "How do I find the split?" "You feel it," the voice said. "The road will change beneath your tires. You'll hear a sound like thunder, but it's not thunder. It's the two roads touching. That's when you have to turn, hard, without hesitating. If you make it, you'll be back on the real highway. If you don't, well, you'll have plenty of company here." I drove for what felt like another hour, though my clock still showed 2:47 a.m. My fuel gauge hadn't moved. Nothing had changed except the growing dread in my gut. Then I felt it. The road beneath me shuddered, a deep, rumbling vibration that traveled up through my tires and into my bones. In the distance, I heard a sound like thunder rolling across the sky, except it was coming from the ground. "Now!" voices shouted over the CB. "That's the split! Turn now!" I cranked my steering wheel hard to the right, feeling my trailer swing wide behind me. The truck lurched and bounced as I left the pavement. I was driving blind into the fog, with no idea if there was a road ahead of me or just empty space. For a terrifying moment, I felt weightless, like I was falling. The fog became even brighter, almost blinding. I heard voices screaming over the CB, warnings, encouragements, farewells. Then my tires hit solid pavement again. The impact jarred my teeth and sent a shockwave through the cab. But I was on a road, a real road, with lane markers and reflectors, and a surface that felt new and properly maintained. The fog began to thin. Within seconds, it had cleared enough for me to see highway signs. Interstate 75, mile marker 159. I was in Kentucky, about 40 miles north of Lexington. I looked at my clock. It showed 6:23 a.m. 4 hours had passed since I'd entered the fog, but it had felt like an eternity. I pulled over at the next rest area, a well-lit, modern facility with other trucks and cars parked there. Real people, real vehicles. I climbed down from my cab on shaking legs and went into the building to use the restroom and buy coffee. When I came back out, I walked around my truck, inspecting it. Everything looked normal except for one detail that made my blood run cold. My truck was covered in dust. Not the normal road dust you'd expect, but thick, gray dust that looked like it had been accumulating for years. It was in every crevice, coating my mirrors, covering my windshield, except where the wipers had cleared it. I wiped some of the dust off my hood and noticed something underneath it. Scratches. Dozens of small scratches in the paint, like my truck had been driven through brush and branches. But I'd been on a highway the whole time, hadn't I? I called my dispatcher and told him I'd had some weather delays, but was back on schedule. I didn't tell him about the fog, or the convoy, or the ghost roads. Who would believe me? I made my delivery to Nashville 5 hours later. The whole time, I kept thinking about those voices on the CB radio. The drivers who'd been trapped in that fog for years or decades. Were they still out there, driving their endless convoy on roads that didn't exist? About a week after the incident, I was talking to another driver at a truck stop in Indiana, an old-timer who'd been driving since the 1950s. I casually mentioned fog convoys and ghost roads just to see how he'd react. His face went pale. "You've seen them," he said. It wasn't a question. "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe I was just tired and seeing things." "You weren't seeing things," he said. "I've heard about the night convoy for years. Lots of old drivers have. Some people say it started back in the 1940s with a convoy of military trucks that got lost in a storm and never arrived at the destination. Others say it's older than that. But everyone agrees on one thing. If you get caught in that fog and join that convoy, you don't come back. Not usually." "I came back," I said. He looked at me with something like awe. "Then you're one of the lucky ones. Most drivers who encounter the night convoy are never seen again. Their trucks are eventually found abandoned on the side of some road, sometimes hundreds of miles from where they were last seen. The drivers are just gone. I never encountered that fog convoy again, though I've driven through fog hundreds of times since then. But I've never forgotten those voices on the CB radio, or the feeling of driving on roads that existed somewhere between reality and nightmare. Sometimes, late at night, when I'm driving through fog, I'll scan through my CB channels just to see if I can hear them. Those lost drivers, still traveling their endless convoy, still hoping to find the split in the road that will lead them home. So far, I've never heard them again, and I pray I never do. But if you're ever driving through thick fog and you see taillights ahead of you, a convoy of old trucks moving in perfect formation, my advice is simple: don't follow them. Find a safe place to pull over and wait for the fog to lift. Because some convoys aren't going anywhere you want to go, and some roads lead to places you can never leave. The third and final story I need to tell you happened 14 years after the fog convoy incident, in the summer of 2003. I was 70 years old by then, and most people thought I should have retired years earlier. But trucking was all I knew, and I wasn't ready to give it up. Besides, I needed the money. Social Security wasn't enough to live on, and I'd never been good at saving. This particular job came to me through a dispatcher I'd never worked with before. He called me on a Tuesday afternoon while I was at home between runs and offered me what he called a special delivery. The pay was exceptional, 3 times what I'd normally make for a similar distance. The catch was that I had to pick up the load at midnight and deliver it before dawn. "What's the cargo?" I asked. "Medical equipment," he said. "Very sensitive, temperature controlled. Has to be delivered within a specific time window." "Why midnight?" "Client's request," he said. "They're very particular about their schedule. Look, Margaret, I know it's unusual, but the pay is good and the route is simple. Pick up in Columbus, Ohio, deliver to a facility outside of Wheeling, West Virginia. 3 hours, maybe 4 with your driving style. Easy money." I should have said no. At 70 years old, I should have known better than to take a mysterious midnight delivery for a dispatcher I didn't know. But the money was too good to pass up, and honestly, I was curious. The pickup location in Columbus was a medical supply warehouse in an industrial area on the east side of the city. I arrived at 11:45 p.m., 15 minutes early. The warehouse was lit up like a prison, with security cameras on every corner and a guard at the gate who checked my credentials 3 times before letting me through. The loading process was strange from the start. The workers wore full hazmat suits, which seemed excessive for medical equipment. They wouldn't let me see what they were loading into my refrigerated trailer, and they made me sign about a dozen non-disclosure agreements. The supervisor, a nervous man in his 40s, kept checking his watch and hurrying everyone along. You need to maintain the temperature at exactly 34 degrees Fahrenheit, he told me. Not 33, not 35. Exactly 34. If the temperature varies by more than 1 degree, you need to call this number immediately. He handed me a card with a phone number on it. What happens if the temperature changes? I asked. He looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. Fear? Worry? Just don't let it change, he said. And whatever you do, don't open the trailer doors until you reach the delivery location. Understand? I understood that something about this job was very wrong. But I'd already signed the contracts, and they'd already loaded my trailer. I couldn't back out now. The delivery address was for a place called Mountain View Research Facility, located on a rural road about 20 miles south of Wheeling. The GPS coordinates put it deep in the Appalachian foothills, far from any town or highway. I left Columbus at 12:30 a.m. and headed east on Interstate 70. The highway was nearly empty at that hour, just a few scattered cars and the occasional truck. I kept checking my refrigeration unit, making sure the temperature stayed at exactly 34 degrees. Whatever was in that trailer, someone was paying a lot of money to keep it cold. Would you have taken this job, or would the red flags have been too obvious? Tell me honestly. Around 2 a.m., I took exit 219 and headed south on a state highway that cut through dense forest. This was coal country, small towns that had seen better days, abandoned mines, and poverty that you could feel in your bones. The road was narrow and winding, with no streetlights and precious few houses. According to my GPS, I needed to turn onto County Road 47 and follow it for about 12 miles. The turn was marked by a small, weathered sign that I almost missed. County Road 47 was barely more than a paved trail, just wide enough for my truck with trees pressing in on both sides. I drove slowly, my headlights cutting through the darkness, revealing nothing but trees and more trees. No houses, no mailboxes, no signs of human habitation, just endless forest. After about 20 minutes, I started to wonder if I'd made a wrong turn. That's when I saw the facility. It appeared suddenly as I came around a curve. A large, modern building that looked completely out of place in this remote location. It was 3 stories tall, made of concrete and steel, with small windows that glowed with cold fluorescent light. A high fence surrounded the property, topped with razor wire. Security cameras were mounted on poles every 50 feet. The main gate was open, as if they'd been expecting me. I pulled through and followed the driveway to a loading dock at the rear of the building. As soon as I stopped, the dock door rolled open and a group of people emerged. They were all wearing the same white hazmat suits I'd seen at the warehouse in Columbus. 6 of them, moving in unison, walking toward my trailer with a sense of urgency that made my skin crawl. I climbed down from my cab and one of the suited figures approached me. I couldn't see their face through the helmet visor, but their voice was male and professional. "You're exactly on time," he said. "Good. We need to unload immediately. Please open your trailer doors." I walked to the back of the trailer and unlocked the doors. The moment I swung them open, I felt a wave of cold air roll out, and with it came a smell. It was faint, but unmistakable. The sweet, sickly smell of decay. "What exactly did I haul here?" I asked. But the man in the hazmat suit ignored me. The crew was already climbing into my trailer, working quickly to unload whatever was inside. I tried to see what they were removing, but they'd positioned themselves to block my view. I caught glimpses of stainless steel containers, about the size of coffins, being wheeled out on gurneys. There were at least 8 of them, maybe 10. The smell was getting stronger. One of the workers stumbled, and the container he was moving shifted slightly. Through a gap in the hazmat suits, I saw something that made my heart nearly stop. There was a hand pressed against the inside of the container's viewing window. A human hand. And it was moving. I stepped back, my mind refusing to process what I'd just seen. "What is in those containers?" I demanded. The man who seemed to be in charge turned to me. "You signed a non-disclosure agreement, Ms. Margaret. You saw nothing here. You delivered medical equipment. That's all. Now we need you to leave immediately." "Those aren't medical equipment," I said. "There are people in there. I saw—" "You saw nothing," he said, his voice harder now. "And if you value your safety and your career, you'll forget you were ever here." 2 more figures in hazmat suits appeared from inside the building. They were carrying something that looked like a rifle, though I couldn't be sure in the dim light. I understood the message. I climbed back into my truck, my hands shaking, and drove away from that facility as fast as I could. As I passed through the gate, I looked in my mirrors and saw them closing the loading dock door. The last thing I saw was one of those steel containers being wheeled inside, and that hand, still pressed against the window, fingers splayed as if reaching for help. I drove for 2 hours before I felt safe enough to stop. When I finally pulled into a truck stop near Pittsburgh, I sat in my cab and tried to make sense of what I'd seen. People in containers, moving hands, the smell of decay, the armed guards. I should have called the police. I should have reported what I'd seen. But I was terrified. These people knew who I was, where I lived. They had my signature on those non-disclosure agreements. And I had no proof of anything. It would be my word against theirs. 2 days later, I received a call from the dispatcher who'd hired me for the job. His voice was cold and businesslike. "I trust the delivery went smoothly," he said. "What was I transporting?" I asked. "Medical equipment, as stated in your contract. I hope you understand the importance of discretion in these matters, Margaret. You have a good reputation in this industry." It would be a shame if anything were to damage that reputation. The threat was clear. I told him I understood, and I never heard from him again. But 3 weeks later, I saw something on the news that made my blood run cold. The FBI had raided a medical research facility in West Virginia, uncovering what they called one of the most disturbing human trafficking operations in U.S. history. The facility had been conducting illegal medical experiments on kidnapped victims, homeless people, undocumented immigrants, people who wouldn't be missed. The news showed aerial footage of the facility being raided. It was the same building I delivered to, the same fence, the same loading dock, the same cold fluorescent lights glowing in the windows. According to the FBI, they'd rescued 17 people from that facility. 17 people who'd been subjected to experimental medical procedures without consent. Some of them had been there for months, some for over a year. And they'd been transported to the facility by unwitting truck drivers who thought they were hauling medical equipment. Drivers like me. I called the FBI tip line and told them everything I knew. I gave them dates, times, descriptions of the people I'd seen. They took my statement and told me I might be called as a witness if the case went to trial. The trial happened 2 years later. I testified about what I'd seen that night. The containers, the hand pressed against the window, the smell, the armed guards. My testimony helped convict 6 people involved in the operation, including the nervous supervisor from Columbus and several of the facility workers. But here's what still haunts me. The FBI said there were 17 victims rescued from that facility. I transported at least 8 containers that night, maybe 10. If each container held 1 person, and if I was the only driver who'd made deliveries there, where did the other victims come from? How many other drivers had unknowingly transported human beings to that facility? And worse, how many other facilities like that one are still operating right now, using legitimate truckers to transport their victims? I retired from trucking 6 months after the trial. I couldn't do it anymore. Every time I picked up a sealed load, every time I hauled something I couldn't see, I wondered if I was participating in something evil. The trust had been broken. The job I'd loved for over 30 years had become a source of nightmares. I'm 82 years old now, and I haven't been behind the wheel of a truck in 12 years. But I still wake up some nights, sweating, remembering that hand pressed against the glass, remembering how I drove away instead of demanding to see what was in those containers, remembering how close I came to just taking the money and forgetting what I'd seen. I did the right thing eventually. I testified. I helped put those monsters in prison. But I'll always wonder about the deliveries I didn't question, the loads I didn't inspect, the times I just took the money and didn't ask questions. That's the real horror of what happened to me. Not that evil exists. I've known that all my life. But that evil can use good people, people just trying to do their jobs, and turn them into accomplices without them ever knowing. If these stories have stayed with you, if they've made you think twice about the world around you, please leave a like, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe, because the road holds more secrets than any of us want to believe. So if you're a truck driver, or if you know one, please, I'm begging you, ask questions. Inspect your loads when you can. If something feels wrong, report it. Don't let money or fear or convenience stop you from doing what's right. Because somewhere out there, right now, there might be another truck carrying another sealed load. And inside that load, there might be someone who needs help. Someone whose life depends on a driver being brave enough to ask questions. Don't be like I was. Don't drive away. Don't take the money and forget what you saw. Because some deliveries cost more than you could ever be paid.